In this workbook called Interactive, we've got a macro in place. We're not seeing it at the moment. It goes through a list like this, and using a do loop, it highlights 3 cells, makes them bold, then moves down, makes the next 3 italics, and so on, over and over and over again. And you might have seen how that was set up in a previous movie. But there are times when you want a macro to pause and ask for input from a user, and then based on that input, maybe take a different action. So in this workbook, we've got a macro. We can get there a number of different ways. Many of you know you can press Alt F11 at any time. We can also go to the Developer tab in the ribbon, and off to the left, click the button for Macros. Here's the only macro in question in this workbook. It's called Bold Italic. We could then click Edit. Not as fast as Alt F11, but sometimes this is better because it immediately takes us to the macro code that we're interested in. Here's the macro in question. But let's make a change to this and allow the user to indicate where this is to be performed. In other words, this bold italic application. So after the initial line here at the beginning, I'm going to press Enter and initially just make up a name. I'm going to call it sheet name or worksheet name. And I can use upper and lowercase as I name this. And once again, if this were a more formal course in VBA, you'd be learning about variables and how you should declare them and so on. But we're doing this pretty fast and sort of on the fly and not a formal VBA course. Worksheet name. We'll use upper and lowercase as we wish. Equal. Now, I'm going to type in input box. This is a recognized Excel VBA command. Input box, left parenthesis. And as soon as I put that in, a series of hints or prompts pop up. I'm going to type in a prompt. Now, eventually the user will see a box on the screen with some text. And what will that text be? It's anything I want it to be, but I'm going to put in double quote and say type sheet name. Or to be a little bit more precise, type worksheet name. I could be even more verbose and say something like type the worksheet name where you want the macro to be performed. But I'll simply say type worksheet name. I'll put a colon behind it. That's not critical, but it looks a little more formal perhaps. I'll put in a double quote. That's what the user will see inside of a box. Now the box can have a title on it. This is not required, but we can provide a title that will appear at the top of the box. It could be something like worksheet selector. I can just make it up. We need to put in a comma first, and I'll just type in, and again in double quotes, worksheet selector. Double quote, right parenthesis, and enter. Now, a reminder here about code in VBA. If you're familiar with programming languages, you might be familiar with the concept. Otherwise, maybe not. When we see equal statements, we may or may not be thinking of algebra, but if this were algebra, what are we saying? We're saying whatever is to the left of the equal sign is equal to whatever is to the right. In programming languages, we think of this in a different way. Whatever this is going to do, and we hope if it works properly, it's going to be a worksheet name, we take the result of that and we store it to the left of the equal sign. That's a concept that not everybody is totally clear on, but that's what will happen here if this works properly. So this will prompt the user to type something. The user will type something, and whatever that user types, it will be stored into this variable here called worksheet name. Now, we're going to use that with a VBA statement that essentially picks that up. Now, we don't necessarily have to start right here under this, but it's sort of a convention to indent this. I'm going to type worksheets, left parenthesis, and now I'll type worksheet name. Now I could retype it, or I could simply copy this. And sometimes when you're interrupting the code like this, you'll get messages like this. Just ignore them, click OK. I'm going to go highlight this, and I can press Control C, or I could even drag it down there with the Control key. But I'll press Control C, click down here, press Control V, worksheets, worksheet name, right parenthesis, period, activate. And as I press enter, watch certain keywords become capitalized. I'll just click enter. There we go. See what's happening. Now, what that means is, in effect, whatever worksheet name the user would have typed in, maybe it's September here, that's stored in the variable called worksheet name. And this statement right here, in effect, means activate the September sheet, and then do what the macro does. In this case, of course, make it be bold or italic, moving up and down the rows. So let's say we click in the worksheet. Now we happen to be on September. Maybe that's the one we'll be typing, or maybe we're looking at short list here, but we want to run the macro. So we can start any number of different ways. As before in previous examples, we'll simply, on the developer tab, certainly one way, go to the macros button. Now there could be a keystroke shortcut, of course. We could have started that way. There's bold italic. Let's run it. And there's that prompt. Remember, I had typed in worksheet selector as the name. That wasn't the critical part. The prompt here, of course, has to be sensible. Makes sense here. I'm going to type in October. As soon as I click OK, we're going to jump to the sheet October, and the macro will run. Now, we didn't see it actually click on October 1st, but we are on the October sheet, and you see that it did run. Now, that's just a simple example, but it does open the door to a different way of thinking of the data. If we press Alt F11 and jump back in here, we're seeing the code pretty straightforward here. And again, a lot of variability in what we type. This is simply, we're prompting the user to do this, and we give it a title. That's not critical, of course, but the idea is whatever is typed gets stored into a variable name over here, and then we use that variable name here with a VBA statement called worksheets. So it opens the door to a different kind of thinking, and it's not uncommon to see interactive macros that prompt the user for data, and then that data is used to perform different kinds of actions in a macro.